Ethics and mindfulness go hand in hand, and there are several different layers to it. It's the ethics of teaching mindfulness, what we teach, how we teach. There's also ethics of how we practice and relationships between participants and teachers. There's a lot there. Hello and welcome to Mindfulness Voyage. My name is Ted Meissner, and today we're going to be exploring the ethics of secular mindfulness programs. Please do like and subscribe if you're getting something out of these episodes, and I'm glad you're here today. Thanks so much, and let's begin. Our guest today is Martin Strom. Martin, welcome to the podcast. Good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward.
So let's dive right in. And for those who are watching or listening to the podcast who might not be familiar with you and your work, could you say just a little bit about who you are and what is it you do? Maybe what brought you to mindfulness?
Yes, I have a weird background. I have a background originally I got a master's degree in computer science and did tech startups and all of that kind of thing. And then back in 2001, my wife, Maria, who's still my wonderful wife, we were vacationing in Thailand, and she had bought me this book called Art of Happiness, where a psychologist interviews the Dalai Lama. And this book kind of went off like a bomb in my life, I guess. It was because I was obviously interested in science and philosophy and psychology and religion even. And suddenly all these things kind of came together in one thing. And there was talk about interesting research being done on these contemplatives. And it made me understand for the first time that I've been chasing happiness in the wrong places, in a sense. So it's made me start to look at my own mind and the role it played in, whether I was suffering or happy. So that brought us to me and Maria. We traveled for 6 months in Asia and went to all different kinds of meditation retreats. And I must have read probably 100 books on Buddhist psychology at that time. And so then that in turn led me to go back to university and get a degree in psychology, because I was interested in how can these like wonderful ideas and techniques and teachings that are kind of embedded in this a lot of times religious context and packaging, how can they be brought to use and be beneficial in the world I lived in. So I went back, and I'm now licensed psychology. I've worked for about 10 years teaching leaders and people in companies mindfulness skills and compassion skills and those kind of things. So yeah, since that time I've kind of been oriented towards finding ways of extracting those ideas from the Buddhist tradition and see how they can be brought under the lens of science and implemented in more secular contexts. So something like that, I guess.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I suspect a lot of the viewers here are familiar with that. Certainly it connected very well with my own experience, being very similar to yours in being a tech guy and science-minded, and finding when I started in the early 90s that the contemplative practices were really very set within particular contexts that were lovely and I continue to be part of, but weren't quite a match for how I viewed the world. And so that led to the creation of secular Buddhism and moving on from that. So thank you so much for that bit of background. And I really want to then focus on our topic today. We're going to talk a little bit about one of the things that you and I are both very interested in, is this idea of how do we apply some of these ethical principles to what we're finding in society today? How can contemplative practices and even traditions inform what might be very helpful to us in our settings today? So maybe you could say just a little bit about what draws you to this idea of applying secular ethics within mindfulness contexts.
Yeah, so when I first went back to university to get that psychology degree, one of the things that really struck me was that this was was for me a really obvious link between ethics or altruism, just being um, a good person and trying to transform your mind in that direction, more love, more kindness, more generosity, more clarity. That wasn't really emphasized in Western psychology at all. The link between ethics and happiness or flourishing and well-being. And I found that supremely strange, to be honest. So, and obviously, mindfulness had started to come in, and there was a lot of research, kicked off by works people like John Kabat-Zinn had started this, mindfulness research wave. But I felt that one of the original intentions of mindfulness, which is to be able to monitor the mind to see whether the states that arise are beneficial or not beneficial, if they're ethical or unethical, that was completely lacking. It was more about um, well, yeah, the skills of paying attention, obviously in a non-judgmental way. And I think that makes sense because we tend to get really harsh on ourselves, and that's like the thing that plagues the Western mind. So maybe it's a good place to start. But discernment is not judgment, and the discernment part was kind of lacking, I found. So yeah, that's where at least it started for me.
Yeah. And I'm glad you described it that way, that ethics are not a set of thou shalt nots. That's not what we're
Mm.
talking about here.
Yeah, yeah.
Really, within the framework of contemplative practice and even in the traditions, it's more so a matter of, as you put it so beautifully, what are the kinds of states of mind and behaviors that can foster more beneficial outcomes for self
Mm.
and others. That's really at a core of what many of us mean when we're talking about ethics. And I wonder if you could just explore that a little bit. Is that something that is, as you mentioned, it's maybe not stressed as much within many programs that we see today. But could you say a little bit about why that's so important around outcomes? Because I found that myself, but I'm interested to hear from you about it too.
Yeah, so I think if you drill all the way around down, and have a close look at your own mind, then you will realize that suffering and happiness are states of mind in itself. That's being joyful, that's the state of mind. Being distraught, and that's the state of mind. But we, like I said, we think it comes from these external things. Give me chocolate cake, I'm happy. Give me nasty person, I suffer, that kind of thing. But it really comes, it is a state of mind. And then certain states of mind are in themselves um, joy, contentment, happiness. So for example, if you feel kindness, if your mind is imbued with kindness or generosity or deep compassion, that is in itself joy and contentment. So the more you cultivate that, the better you are going to feel. But then obviously the opposite. If we have in our minds jealousy or malice or um, yeah, just strong greed or whatever it might be, that's uncomfortable. So that's in itself suffering. But then also leading on from that, you also act in certain ways when your mind is filled with one or the other. And if you're acting from those beneficial states, then you will be a benefit to others, and you will care about their happiness and their well-being, and you will limit the harm that you do in the world. And I think just maybe briefly also, like my working definition of ethics would have those parts of, first of all, refrain from doing harm, because people or animals, they don't want to be harmed, just like yourself. And so that's like the bottom level. But then if you can be of benefit, be helpful, um, be of service, do things that increases other people's well-being and so on. So those are like, that's like the baseline. But then on top of that, intention is also an important part of it. For example, if I give you, say I give you a present, then is that ethical or not? Then, well, that depends on my motivation. If I'm just trying to manipulate you and get you to do whatever, that's unethical. So it's also, you have to look at the attention from which a certain action arises. And then finally, since we can be good intention, but we still mess things up, we also need some kind of wisdom, clarity, groundedness. So yeah, so those that would be like my definition of what's ethical. Don't do harm, do good, look at your intention, and cultivate some kind of insight, wisdom, clarity.
I think that's a really
And
nice framework
I went off
because
on
so
a
much
tangent
there.
there. I don't even remember what the actual question was, but yeah.
No, I think that was a beautiful definition. The framework is so inclusive of just the base, don't be a jerk,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and builds up from there. And not because, again, these are from on high or external, they are things we can observe in each moment. And so,
Mm,
for those who are still kind of trying to wrap your heads and hearts around these ideas, just think about what is it like when you help someone? What is that like? For many of us, that tends to bring an uplifting feeling, especially when you can see the results of that help. That really builds one up. And when you're in that state of mind, and I love the way you describe these as appropriately states of mind, because that's what
mm.
they are, that itself can build and continue to grow. I've not found diminishing returns with this. It's one of the wonderful things about it.
Yeah.
Also brought up a beautiful point about our intention, and that sometimes things don't go quite as we had hoped. You do some kindness, for example, and it goes sideways. It doesn't quite work out that way as
Mm,
you had intended. And that happens. And this is the importance of that wisdom, that discernment of, yeah, things do sometimes go pear-shaped,
mm,
and that's simply outside of our control. We can't control everything. And again, is an opportunity for us to really practice that curiosity, that kindness to the moments and the situations that are here as well. And I'm wondering, how has that shown up for you in your own life when things have gone as a different way? What has that been like for you, just to bring in this practice of, this is one of those moments of discernment and
mm.
kindness?
Yeah, I think you know one of the things I did, originally when I came across all these wonderful ideas and had what I felt was like an epiphany in my own life. I had a tendency to kind of try and push that onto everyone else. And you know, yeah, I've read this amazing book and it changed my life. And I, gave copies to everyone and no one really cared. And yeah, so I think um, that's a good that was a good learning for me because unless we really have to start with ourselves and the main beneficiary of any of this, the main beneficiary of trying to be ethical or altruistic is oneself. And that's a really good place to start. And until you figure that out, you're not in a very good position a lot of times to help others, especially if they, didn't ask for that help to be given. So yeah, that was a big learning for me, and just paying attention to my intention. Like, yeah, why am I trying to do these things? And yeah, sometimes just letting things go, relaxing and easing into a more natural flow.
Yeah.
And then another thing that comes up, just is I have a daughter. She's now 16 years old. And I got into, the meditation and all that before she was born, and I was feeling, quite holy. I can't remember. I don't experience much anger. Isn't that lovely? And then my daughter was born, and she showed me my anger. She could push all the right uh, buttons and keep pushing
Experience of
them.
being a parent. Yes.
Exactly. So, and then, and that was really, it was those moments when I had the ability to watch that anger as it arises, and it's like this impulse to yell or whatever, but just when I could see that anger come up, and just allow it to be there and not necessarily act upon it, those were really powerful moments. And um, my daughter then, yeah, like became my teacher of patience or something like that. Yeah, and then everyday life presents many micro opportunities like that to just see when we mess up, or when we react in ways that um, maybe aren't congruent with who we want to be. But yeah, bringing awareness and love and openness to those experiences.
Yeah. And it's interesting that the circumstances we're in can affect how we are to such a degree that we're in this place where we've been meditating for a long time, and then conditions in our life change. And maybe
Yeah.
even in wonderful ways, having a daughter and all that, but still there's a whole bunch of things that come along with that. And again, here too, that discernment, that patience, care for oneself and others to reset to that new normal is part of an active engagement with ethics. It's not something you would put up on a wall, it's something that you live with and work
Mm,
with each and every
yeah.
day. Anything else you'd like to share with the listeners before I let you go?
Um, no, I think that so I was saying that I was surprised that this connection between ethics and well-being or human flourishing wasn't really um, hasn't really been explored in Western psychology. But I think that there are some promising signs that we're moving into that direction now. There's a lot of research on compassion, and I think um, I think also we will be eventually bringing in what might be viewed as some of the wisdom aspects from the contemplative traditions as well into what we study and what we practice in medicine and psychology. So I'm really hopeful that we're on that trajectory. And also I think that this is something that we really should be teaching our kids, as early as possible, because no one is teaching you how to observe your mind and the mechanics of your mind, and teaching kids to really pay attention to those wholesome or beneficial intentions, um, and allowing them to have ways to cultivate those, and then ways to deal with the ones that are maybe more destructive or not so beneficial, to to hold those and understand them and transform them. That's what we should be teaching everyone in school, before 1+1 even, I think. But I hope that we're moving, along that trajectory, and slowly it's getting better and better. And I think if we don't do that, then we're probably screwed. We're consuming the hell out of this planet, and we're treating each other rather poorly. So unless we start, and it's never going to change if it doesn't change in individual minds. So yeah, that's why I guess I am so passionate about bringing those things into the mindfulness movement and and many other arenas as well.
Yeah. And it's interesting, Martin, what you were saying about bringing this in for kids. Just today, I was posting new research about mindfulness for preschoolers and doing another interview, which I think is appearing just before this one in the lineup. And part of that was about the relationship of mindfulness and parents and their relationship with infants. And so we're seeing more interest and research on that. And again, for those who are watchers of this or listening to this podcast, and you come from a traditional background and setting, so do many of us. I still do as well. What we're talking about here doesn't take away from that. That's entirely your choice living in that context that is supportive and meaningful to you. That's fine. This is another way to look at ethics based on another perspective. What does research say? What can we point to in the natural world based on the condition of being a human? So with that, our guest today, Martin Strom. Martin, thank you so much for being here today. Really enjoyed the conversation.
I loved it. Thank you so much for having me.
Ethical considerations are more than just a list of do's and don'ts. It's how we are with each other in the most supportive ways possible. Remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. I'll see you next time on Mindfulness Voyage.